Perfect. All right. Diagwit. My name is Nick Cotter. I'm a sheep farmer running 200 ewes in partnership with my dad in Abbeyfield, County Limerick. And our family run a few farm diversification enterprises, selling firewood, direct selling boxed lamb, and we have a agri-tech startup. And we are organic, which is why I'm interested in ways to reduce chemical inputs. And this is why I decided on this topic, 7 new rules for worm control in sheep. So getting right into it. Worms cost the Irish livestock industry €237 million annually, and this cost is increasing as resistance is rapidly developing to the chemicals we use to control worms. Resistance is on 100% of sheep farms in Ireland, and also 100% of dairy calf to beef farms. So everything I'm about to say is just as relevant to cattle as it is to sheep. Now, Professor Tommy Boland of UCD has said that resistance is the single biggest threat to the future of grass-based lamb production. Our grass-fed advantage, competitive advantage, and international reputation is at stake here. And to understand why Tommy said that, I went to New Zealand, who are ahead of us in terms of resistance. And there I met Leslie Coppell and Rob Foreman, 2 New Zealand farmers. Leslie and Rob almost went broke from drench resistance. Leslie remortgaged her farm, and Rob was loss-making 3 years running due to not being able to control worms and produce lamb profitably. Resistance brought huge financial pressure and took a significant mental toll on them and their families. Both made significant changes to their farm systems to reduce drug usage, and 3 years later, they have reversed resistance. So this is not a death sentence, but we in Ireland are racing towards a similar crisis. Now, the quickest fix would be to introduce minimum pricing for drenches. It's worked for smoking, it's worked for alcohol, but I suspect all my farming friends would shoot me. So let's talk about other options. To summarize where I traveled, 12 countries, 36 flights, nearly 150 meetings with farmers, vets and researchers, and one amazing GFP, a group of 10 scholars, all of us farmers, traveling for 5 weeks, making memories. Highlights of mine, there was a night camping under the stars on a ranch in Nebraska, another day floating down a river in a livestock drinking truck. It was incredible. And I just want to acknowledge the generosity of the Nuffield scholars around the world who looked after us. And it's been great post the GFP to have some of the group visit. So yes, lifelong friends made. Back to worms. So since the early 2000s, we have an excellent understanding of how resistance develops. It was then that the Sustainable Control of Parasites group was formed, and they created guidelines on how to avoid resistance, which Teagasc quickly adopted. So for 20 years, we've been told the simple things to do to avoid resistance. And I suppose awareness of resistance is high, so I thought we must be doing them. But resistance is developing faster than ever. So I assumed the basics mustn't be enough, and I need to go and look for some next generation tools. However, what I found was that the basics are not being done on most farms. 2022 data from Animal Health Ireland shows 43% of Irish sheep farmers have never calibrated their drench gun. 52% do not routinely quarantine new animals, and 83% have never tested if their drugs work. And in cattle, the adoption of the 3 basics is even lower. So we need to first discuss why farmers are not doing the basics before discussing what comes after the basics. So rule 1 of these 7 rules is start with the basics. Now I think about drench resistance like trying to lose weight. Both have been a recent focus for me between getting this paper ready and at the same time losing 20 kilos, the equivalent of a bag of ration. In both cases, doing the wrong thing is easier and takes far less effort than doing the right thing. And both of them are driven by the same 3 factors: our mindset, our habits, and our environment. So changing mindset requires recognizing you have a problem, ideally before it's well developed. And farmers do not regularly test if their drenches work, so they only act when it's really obvious, which is around 50% efficacy. When things get this bad, it takes a huge effort to solve it. We all know someone who didn't act on their health not until they got a concerning blood test, or worse again, a heart attack. We need more regular monitoring. Habits. Habits are hard to break. We are told to exercise a bit more and eat a bit less, but it's useless without a plan for embedding those healthier habits into your specific life. We hand down similar slogans to farmers on worm control, but many farmers can't see how these broad guidelines fit their specific farm, so they've been unable to break their bad habits. And our environment. Drenches are marketed as a feel-good comfort blanket that our animals are protected. It's like fast food engineered so we feel good when we eat it. The system is encouraging doing the wrong thing. So any country that wants to be a world leader in sheep farming needs a framework to overcome these human factors by educating farmers on good worm control practices. New Zealand had the best framework. Their levy body has developed in-person workshops where they teach the big principles, and then farmers build their own farm-specific plan with the help of the facilitator and their peers. In Ireland, we've got these good broad guidelines, but once a farmer asks a farm-specific question, they are told, talk to your vet. However, survey data shows 92% of Irish sheep farmers plan their drenching practices alone. So, I suppose we're dropping the baton. Farmers need a forum where they can ask the on my farm questions and leave with a plan unique to their farm. With industry partners, we've secured $650,000 for a Department of Ag funded EIP project to trial this workshop format. We have a great saying in our business at home: go slow to go fast later. If you haven't got the basics right, you're going nowhere. Rule 2 is don't put all your eggs in the feck basket. Over the last decade, the decision on when we treat animals has swung from sole reliance on stockmanship to sole reliance on data, specifically on fecal egg counts, or FECs for short. For many farmers and vets, so much hinges on the FEC result. And guidance from Teagasc is if FEC is above 500, then dose. If it's below 500, don't. Very simple. And we have embraced this approach and done 1,139 FECs since 2016, spending nearly €14,000. But from our experience, I've become skeptical about FEC as the single factor to dosing or not. And I was excited about this because I thought I was after discovering something new. But when I went to the Southern Hemisphere, I found out New Zealand vet Trevor Cook found what I found, but he found it 25 years before me, before I was even born. Off the back of Trevor's work, the Kiwis abandoned this approach. Trevor showed that FEC results are highly variable to the point that using 500 as a threshold will commonly lead to the wrong decision, either harmful withholding of drugs or unnecessary dosing. Now, to find out if FEC test quality has improved since Trevor's work, I visited Deb Maxwell, who runs Australia's National FEC Quality Assurance Programme. And Deb told me that plus or minus 150 is their past standard. This means that on a 500 count, 350 and 650 are acceptable. Now, 350 and 650 would lead to very different drenching outcomes in Ireland. And when I asked why such a range was acceptable, Deb said, FECs just aren't that accurate. They are like Chinese whispers. You have room for error at every stage, from the poo consistency to the farmer sampling to transport to the lab's process. And currently, about 55% of Aussie labs fail to meet the standard. So what's the correct approach? Like checking the weather, we don't just rely on one source. We need to bring more factors to the table. In the UK, I spoke with vet JP Crilly, who lectures at the Royal Veterinary College. And he gives vet students case studies. FEC is A, weather is B, pasture quality is C, farmer said the stock looked like D. Make a call, does this farmer need to dose? This emphasizes that FECs should not be used on their own, and stockmanship is just as, if not more important, than FECs. On this point, JP showed me a study which compared mortality rate at lambing between farmers with and without a formal agricultural qualification. It'll surprise some in this room and not others, but those with no formal ag qualification had lower mortality, and this was down to more experience and more practical skills. So there is a huge place for gut instinct, but the best outcome will be combining stockmanship with data. Simply, the more factors we use, the better the decisions we make. Rule 3, the training should be hard, so the game is easy. This is the motto of Tom Bull, a leading Australian sheep breeder I met. For Tom, many rams are bred in perfect environments that are not commercially relevant. His policy is running stock harder than a commercial farmer might do with minimal health inputs. His focus is selecting sheep that don't need dagging, don't get lame, and don't need drenching. Farmers like Tom reported a halving of drenching after years of selection, but there are wider health benefits. Research by Dr. Kelsey Bentley in America shows sheep who need less drenching are also foot rot resistant, and they produce 3 times more antibodies in their milk, which in one study led to a halving of lamb losses from birth to weaning. So breeding sheep who need less drenching is giving us an all-around healthier, more profitable sheep. But breeding is not a silver bullet, as even the most worm-tolerant sheep need drenching. But it's a big part of the solution that's underutilized, and to me is absolutely fundamental to generational renewal. Rule 4 is the majority of lambs, a minority of ewes, almost never all. The concept of only treating the animals who need it and leaving some animals untreated is called targeted selective treatment, or TST for short. This is becoming the gold standard in agri-chemical usage. We see it in selective dry cow therapy, a legal requirement in the European Union. And on our GFP, we visited a US John Deere dealer. They had a boom sprayer with integrated AI cameras that detect and spray only the weeds instead of the whole field. And then in terms of selective parasite control, this has been trialled by Dr. Fiona Kenyon from the Morden Institute in Scotland. She compared blanket dosing all the lambs monthly with TST, where only the ones who did not hit performance targets were dosed. At the end of a 5-year study, drug efficacy fell in the blanket group from 95 to 60%, whereas in the TST group, it held at 90%. Growth rates were identical between groups, but 45% less chemical was used in the TST group. And progressive farmers I met all around the world have adopted TST, but the lack of handling facilities on many sheep farms remains a barrier for most, along with a culture change needed to get farmers comfortable with leaving animals untreated. Rule 5 is go beyond drugs, and more drugs. James O'Shaughnessy, the Department of Agriculture's expert on worms, said this when pointing out we spend endless time debating which product is best and how often to give it, yet barely discuss how to avoid animals getting worms in the first place. If lambs never got worms, they would grow 50% faster compared to farms that currently drench lambs every 21 days. This shows we can't just drench our way to high animal performance. The way to really high growth rates is avoiding worms. Now, there are good pasture management strategies to achieve this that are suitable to only some farms, things like rotational grazing, grazing with cattle, and finishing crops. But a new tool that will be applicable to every farm is mapping farm paddocks by the risk of having a high, medium, or low worm burden. This has been pushed for decades, but it's hard to do manually. But smartphone apps are in development which automatically track the paddock risk, and this will help farmers make smarter grazing choices to avoid worm challenge to lambs. Rule 6 is shoot them, stab them, drown them, which is a quote from Australian sheep farmer Matt Kelly. In the Northern Hemisphere, we use one drug at a time, but Matt explained that he always uses a mix of drugs together since it's best practice in the Southern Hemisphere. The logic is simple maths. We have 100 worms in our sheep. Drug 1 is 90% effective, 10 survivors. If we add a second drug, assuming 80% efficacy, 2 survivors. And if we use a third drug, assuming 50% efficacy, 1 lone survivor. This is 10 times less resistant worms remaining than if we just use one drug. Less survivors means less of them contribute to the next generation, and our risk of developing resistance is much lower. Now, I was unsure whether to agree with Matt, since on basic observation, Australia and New Zealand have the highest levels of drench resistance in the world. So I kept digging. And I found out by accident that in crop protection, the cocktail approach is best practice globally. I did a half marathon with 2024 Nuffield Canada scholar Lauren Benoit, an agronomist with agri-chemical giant Bayer. We got talking about Nuffield, and I said I wasn't sure about these cocktails. And she said she actually did her master's on this very topic. She sent me the largest ever real-world study on herbicide resistance. 105 farms in Illinois, the heart of US corn production, were tracked over 7 years. They found that for every 1 additional drug farmers put in their tank, resistance developed 83 times slower. Now, Lauren's great, but the conspiracy theorist in me said this was an employee from a drug company, and to someone with a hammer in their hand, every problem looks like a nail. So I kept digging. And this led me to Dave Rendell, a retired Aussie vet, an early promoter of cocktails. In defending it, Dave mentioned that cocktails have helped save lives. If you look at the big three infectious diseases, HIV, also known as AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, they killed nearly 5 million people at their peak in the early 2000s. Effective drugs were available since the mid-20th century, but when used on their own, resistance rapidly developed and they stopped working. A new strategy of mixing these drugs into a cocktail was adopted in the late 90s, and annual deaths have since been halved. 70 million lives saved, largely due to cocktails. So the maths didn't lie. The last rule is as much as necessary, as little as possible, but not zero. The negative environmental impact of these drugs on biodiversity is increasingly being highlighted. Avoiding environmental impact is a huge positive of reduced use, but zero use is not the target. These drugs have been a part of the green revolution. Without them, farms will be unviable, animal welfare will suffer, and greenhouse gas emissions will increase. We must be pragmatic and keep welfare and profitability center of the discussion. It's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. Farmers can't be in the green if they are in the red. So I came up with these 7 rules for farmers, but I have 7 policy recommendations to facilitate adoption of the 7 rules. These are a €10 per ewe payment for parasite control workshop participation, the establishment of an Irish fecal egg count quality assurance programme, a €10 per lamb payment for health trait recording on Sheep Ireland, an overhaul of TAMS to include modern sheep handling facilities, investment in demonstrating sustainable worm control strategies, thus creating farming champions of good worm control practice. Then the whole of industry to reconsider the science behind cocktails and the HPRA to encourage applications from manufacturers. And finally, the establishment of a new industry group to advocate for policy to combating anthelmintic resistance in sheep and prevent this threat compromising our grass-fed advantage. So finally, I just want to say a few thank yous. To my girlfriend Aoife, I can only start at sorry and thank you. To my family who've picked up the slack across the family businesses, to Nuffield Ireland sponsors for making this life-changing programme possible, to Michael Burkery and Karen Brosnan for picking me, and finally to Joe and Catherine Lascaretz for your guidance and support throughout.